The clergy are wearing red vestments. So you likely guessed that Alphege's story ends with his death, his martyrdom. And you would be right. But I'm guessing that many of you don't know the details behind when or how or why Alphege died, unless you study the Middle Ages in earnest. So we'll have to catch some of you up. Alphege was born in 953 to a wealthy family. Disappointing his mother, he decided to become a monk. He then became a hermit, followed by an abbot, was ordained a bishop, and eventually became the Archbishop of Canterbury. A few years later, after this, the Danes, also known as the Vikings, invaded England. They took control of Canterbury and proceeded to burn down the cathedral. While they were plundering and looting the city, they took captive the beloved archbishop who had refused to leave his post. The Danes craftily thought they could get an insanely large sum from Alphege's people for his return. And the Danes probably would have succeeded at this. The people of Canterbury would have eventually scrounged up enough money to pay that insane sum. And the archbishop may have been returned. But the bishop refused to be ransomed. Out of a deeply ingrained principle of justice and a knowledge of the poverty of his people, Alphege stayed put for 7 months in captivity with the Danes. How could he go free at such a high cost to his people? Hadn't he seen their tattered clothing draping from their hungry bodies? Was he not aware of that scarcity that his people suffered from day to day to day? He could not let his people be extorted on his account, and so he remained with the Danes. And 7 months into his captivity, in the darkness of a night, the Danes became drunk and grew impatient with the beloved bishop. And at this drunken feast, they began to implore the bishop for the money, to which he refused yet again. They grew angrier and angrier, as mobs do, and began to hurl insults and eventually bones at the bishop. The violence escalated, as it so often does, and a final blow of an axe ended Alphege's life. His hagiographers say he was a martyr for justice. And because justice is inextricably linked with truth, that he was a martyr for Christ. Now, this is the account that lingers in the memory of the church across an ocean and a millennium and a tradition. And it's only a distillation of Alphege's story. We don't have much more. But it is enough for us to ponder tonight. And as you probably noticed, his example is not the easiest one to follow for those of us who want to be pastors of our own flock. It's not an easy example for anyone who oversees anything: a family, college students, a business, a seminary. So we pause to ask ourselves, how did he do that? How did he give himself up for their sake? What prayers had he uttered in captivity? What psalms did he revisit like familiar companions? What ground was made smooth by his fervent discernment? What love led him there? The love of Jesus, of course. To hear Alphege's story is to hear the Christ story anew. Like a round of a great and ongoing chorus, Alphege sang out his life to its very breathless end in the chorus of Christ's own sacrificial song. Alphege's own self-giving was his participation in the death of Christ. And our gospel text this evening reminds us of those events that led up to Jesus' gruesome death, in case we had already forgotten Holy Week. Jesus stands before Herod, being questioned, and like a sheep headed to the slaughter, is silent. Jesus gave Herod no answer, Luke tells us. Nothing to perk Herod's sympathy or explain his miracles or his ministry. He didn't eloquently expound on his teachings one last time or give an account of the reasons that he had come. No, Jesus didn't answer. I wonder, for the violent propensity of humanity and the cross-shaped violence about to be done, would there have been any sufficient words for such a moment? Jesus' silence in some mysterious way was his consent to that death-destined road, to be beaten, nailed, and killed for us, for his flock who could not, in so many words, pay the price of his or our release. Unable ourselves to diminish death and release ourselves from our violent ways, Jesus stands in, and miraculously, the Easter Alleluias have been sung ever since. So the question is, how do we join in? How do we sing such a haunting, costly, and beautiful song? We practice. You likely already know what it means to belong to Christ, to participate in his death, at least in some ways. You've made sacrifices yourself. You've packed your bags, moved here, said goodbye to families and church communities. And you'll be asked to say goodbye again and again and again. Maybe you're currently preparing to say goodbye to this place soon. And you've probably missed birthdays of loved ones and momentous occasions and births and difficult seasons and maybe even deaths to be here in this place right now where Christ beckons you. We practice as we sink into the painful purgation of dying to sin, of staring at yourself straight in the mirror and saying, I have really messed this up. By naming our angry judgments, by naming our power grabs, by noticing our convenient consumption patterns, our habitual gossip, the alienating prejudices rooted deep within us. We may not be the Danes burning down the cathedral or Herod questioning Jesus, but we know that we're not innocent bystanders to the systems of evil that encircle and sometimes hold us captive. So we ask to be cleansed, to be changed, to be made new. And we know it is so costly and so worth it. Because life flowers forth from sacrifice. peculiar leaders like Alphege allow for his people to feed themselves and clothe themselves maybe just a little longer. And we all know what Christ's death and sacrifice means to us. So we don't just die daily to be martyrs. We die daily to sin and pack up our homes yet again because the way of the cross invites us into the reality of the resurrection, the pulsing expectation of what is and what is not yet, but what will be. If we can't see the worth of our sacrifices in any given moment, that's okay. Because the pain or the grief or the loneliness or the sadness are all a part of this process. But also, remember, have faith. The sacrifices that we make as a mysterious extension of Christ's own passion expand and multiply the force of love in our world. So join in the chorus, practice all you can, that costly and beautiful tune. This love is expensive, but so worth it.